Hey guys, I'm Redeem Zoomer. So today's video is going to be a bit different than usual. We're going to be making a tier list of Christian composers. By composers, I mean like Baroque, classical, romantic composers. So even though I'm in seminary right now, I do have a college degree in music and mathematics, and for most of my life, I was a musician. I was a viola player, and still kind of am. So I do have a background in classical music. I love listening to classical music. So we're going to be ranking all the classical music composers that had something to do with Christianity, and when I say all, I mean only a very select few, because there are thousands of composers and I can't possibly include them all. So let's get right into it. So in S tier, the best composer, objectively, no question, Johann Sebastian Bach. I'm going to have the composer and also their denomination. So Johann Sebastian Bach was a very, very devout Lutheran. I'm going to specify whether these composers were devout or just nominal, because most of these composers are from Europe, where for centuries you basically had to be Christian to get by economically, but a lot of them were not very devout. Bach was extremely devout. In music history class, we looked over some copies of Bach's personal theological library. He was very interested in Lutheran scholasticism. He cared deeply about theology. Some people think Bach went Catholic. No, that was one of his 20 children that went Catholic. Johann Christian Bach, his son, was a classical composer who went Catholic. So Bach was very devout, wrote a lot of great music. My favorite things by Bach are some of his secular works, like the Brandenburg Concerti, but he wrote Soli Deo Gloria on all of his works. He saw everything as a service to God, so I think it's a great testimony to our faith that the greatest, objectively the greatest composer. Basically, nobody who's really educated in music disputes that Bach is the best composer. The best composer was also a very, very devout Christian, very, very devout Protestant. So next up in S tier, we also have Handel. Now, Bach and Handel are both Baroque. I feel like Handel's kind of like the pop music of Baroque music. Handel's not as good as Bach. Everyone knew it. Handel knew it. Bach knew it. But Handel's music, at least on the surface, can be a bit more catchy, a bit more enjoyable, because he has simpler melodies, and Handel's sacred works are amazing. Handel's Messiah is amazing. All of Handel's oratorias are amazing. My favorite work of art on any one of the apocryphal books is actually written by a Protestant, because I love Handel's Judas Maccabeus oratorio. Judas Maccabeus is great, and of course it is based on the Hanukkah story from Maccabees. So I think for Bach, I personally like his secular works better, even though he has sacred works, and I like Handel's sacred works better, even though he has secular works. And as a side note, by the way, I think it's really stupid when Christians talk about secular music. Like they're wondering, is it okay to listen to secular music? That's just a pet peeve of mine, because that is just so ingrained into the evangelical Southern culture mindset that the only two genres of music are like degenerate modern hip-hop and rap, or Christian worship and praise music, and they're basically illiterate to all the other forms of music throughout history. Like, a Beethoven symphony is secular music. Even a Bach concerto that's not explicitly religious is secular music. So it is a really cringe aspect of evangelical culture that they think secular means bad. Like, bro, you wipe your butt with secular toilet paper every day. Come on. Anyway, what was I talking about? I was talking about classical music. Well, technically, I'm talking about Baroque music, but Baroque, classical, and Romantic get subsumed under the label classical. So next, there is Franz Joseph Haydn. He was a very devout Catholic. He was Austrian. He wrote The Creation, which is awesome. And he was a very kind man. Everyone loves the story of the Farewell Symphony. If you don't know that, it's a great story. My favorite works by Haydn might be The Creation, and his string quartets are good. His symphonies are good. Everyone loves the Surprise Symphony. Everyone loves the Farewell Symphony. And Haydn's been called the father of the symphony. He sort of pioneered the genre of the symphony that later composers like Beethoven would use. And what else did he do? Yeah, he basically invented the string quartet. And I played many string quartets over the course of my life as a violist. All right, next is Arcangelo Corelli. I think he's massively underrated. Everyone knows Corelli's a good composer, but I think he's like one of the top 5 composers of all time. Great Italian Baroque composer. My favorite style is the Italian Baroque genre with Corelli and Torelli and Albinoni and those guys. And even though he's not my personal favorite composer, Corelli is definitely the best of that genre. My personal favorite composer of all time is this guy, Giuseppe Torelli. He's more obscure. Most of you probably don't know about him. I would recommend his Concerto Grosso, Opus 8. And for I understand that there's a difference between objective and subjective beauty. If we're going by objective beauty, Bach's music is objectively the best. But subjectively, my favorite composer is Giuseppe Torelli. And it's not clear what religion he was, but he was from Italy in the 1600s, so he was obviously Catholic. All right, next up we have Mozart and Beethoven. Beethoven, Mozart, and Bach are the big three, but of those three, Bach was the only one who was like really devout. Mozart was a Freemason, and Bach was a Enlightenment French Revolution enjoyer. So they were both a bit more nominally Catholic. All right, so this is S tier. These are the S tier Christian composers. Now let's move on to A tier. So A is still really good, just not like world-changing the way S tier is. So we have Mendelssohn. I love Mendelssohn. A piece by him I recommend is his octet. The Mendelssohn octet is great. And what I love about Mendelssohn, especially as somebody who is whose father was born Jewish and converted to Protestantism, that's what Mendelssohn did as well. Mendelssohn came from a very Jewish background. His grandfather, Moses Mendelssohn, was like a famous Jewish philosopher, theologian, and activist, and then Mendelssohn converts to Christianity. I think that's really based. So he was a devout Lutheran and wrote the Reformation Symphony, which has a theme and variations on Luther's A Mighty Fortress Is Our God. So yes, as somebody who has a Jewish background and is Protestant, I really like Mendelssohn. And next there is Telemann, a great Baroque composer. Telemann lived to be 86, which is pretty impressive for the Baroque era, and he's the most prolific composer of all time. Prolific means he wrote more music than any other composer ever. If you look up who's the most prolific composer, it's Telemann. Sometimes I'll find a piece by Telemann I really like, and then I can't find it again because there's just so much. I'll put some links in the description of this video for like pieces by all these composers I really like. I got introduced to Telemann because there are only 3 Baroque viola pieces. Only 3 pieces in the Baroque era for viola, and the Baroque era is my favorite era. And Telemann wrote 2 of them. Because Telemann wrote so much music, he had to write for the viola eventually. If you're a violist like me, a big problem violists have is there isn't much music written specifically for the viola. We often have to play music that was written originally for the violin or the cello. So what I do love is that Bach did write one of the 6 Brandenburg Concerti for 2 violas, and it had no violins. And Bach's description of that piece is it's like the kingdom of heaven. So this means that violinists don't go to heaven. That's bad news for my wife, I guess. I'm kidding. But, you know, that does seem to be the implication of Bach's piece. Anyway, next up we have Palestrina. Very devout Catholic. He is technically Renaissance, not Baroque, but he masters 16th century polyphony like nobody else. There is no more like pure sacred tonal music than Palestrina, because in the 20th century everyone decided, hey, what if we make music suck and like really bad and make it all atonal? But the opposite of like Schoenberg is Palestrina. In fact, when I was in music history class and we were given this propaganda about this modern 20th century music, I did an edit of the Harry Potter movie where Harry Potter's soul is getting sucked out by the Dementors, and I put like Schoenberg, I put like modern atonal music over that. And then when the Patronus charm casts away the Dementors, I had Palestrina. Actually, not Palestrina. I think it was like Allegri. Same thing. But you get the idea. Palestrina is the antithesis of this modern garbage. Next up, we have Vivaldi. So, like I said Handel's like the pop music of Baroque music. Vivaldi is kind of like the rock music of Baroque music. And Bach is the Baroque music of Baroque music. But Vivaldi is called the Red-Headed Priest because he was a priest. He wrote the Four Seasons, but that's not his best stuff. My favorite works by Vivaldi, Vivaldi's Gloria, that's some of his best religious music, and I love his cello concertos as well. His violin concerti are okay, but the joke about Vivaldi is he wrote the same concerto 470 times. Next up, we have Monteverdi, and he was also a Catholic priest, and he basically invented Baroque music. His Orfeo opera, which is not Christian, it's based on a pagan myth, but his Orfeo opera is known as the first Baroque piece. I highly recommend it. A pattern you'll notice is that most great composers that were religious at all were either Catholic or Lutheran, because until the mid-Romantic era, there are only like 3 countries that really produced composers: Germany, Austria, and Italy, like those Central European countries. And that's like where classical music happens. Like, even though there's other powerful countries like Portugal, there aren't like Portuguese composers. It's not until late Romantic nationalism that you really see composers from every European country. Next up, we have Thomas Tallis, who's a great Anglican Renaissance composer. It's unclear whether he was Catholic or Anglican. Some people think he was Catholic, but he wrote for the Church of England, and he didn't seem to object, and he was willing to adjust his style. It's really complicated what Anglicanism even was in the Renaissance, because the Church of England kept bouncing back and forth between Anglican and Catholic. So, but there aren't many Anglican composers, so I'm going to give the Anglicans this one. Okay, next up we have Schubert, who wrote the famous Ave Maria. He's very culturally Catholic, wasn't very devout though. And then we have Brahms, who was culturally Lutheran, and there are some Protestant themes in his music. As a side note, in Brahms's First Symphony, he has this brass chorale, this beautiful brass chorale, and during his time, that was a symbol of Protestantism. Any homophonic chorale, where you have multiple voices in the same rhythm, was a symbol of Protestantism, because everyone knew back then Protestant music is four-part singing. And that's why I absolutely despise contemporary worship music. Not just because it sucks, even though it does, but it totally ruins the perception of Protestantism. Even if you could somehow, subjectively say somehow that helps you worship God better, that is not the historic Protestant style. So you are polluting the church if you ever allow contemporary worship music into the church. I'm sorry. But the Protestant style is four-part psalms and hymns. That's Protestant music. That music was very much developed by the Reformation. Anyway, rant over. And then we have Tchaikovsky. He was culturally very Eastern Orthodox, very patriotic Russian, and he's amazing. Now, was he devout? Well, he was LGBT, and that caused a bit of a rift between him and his religious upbringing. He's one of the most clearly gay composers. I mean, a lot of the composers were kind of gay secretly, but Tchaikovsky's one of the most obvious. Next, we have... Now, these composers, Claude Goudamel and Jan Pieterszoon Sweelinck, are not the most famous, but because I'm a Calvinist, I have to put the only two Calvinist composers that I know about on here. So Claude Goudamel wrote the Genevan Psalter, which is kind of like the ancestor of basically every modern American hymn ever. So Claude Goudamel, he didn't write that much except the Genevan Psalter, but the thing he wrote was very influential. And Sweelinck is Dutch Reformed, and he wrote a lot of variations on the Genevan Psalter, and Sweelinck was very important for the development of harpsichord music. So these probably wouldn't be on this tier list if the maker of this tier list wasn't a Calvinist who's desperate to find some Calvinist music, but these are two Calvinist composers from history. All right, next we have Sibelius, who I think was Lutheran, and Sibelius was late Romantic, so he was a Finnish composer, and he's revered in Finland because he's like the one culture thing they have that other people recognize. Next, we have Fauré, and the Fauré Requiem is absolutely beautiful. I highly recommend listening to it. He was a devout Catholic. Then there's Dvorak. I love Dvorak. His New World Symphony is great. His quartets are great. His American Quartet is great. He was a Czech Catholic. I think he was... Dvorak is one of the few composers that the woke people who run the music universities actually approve of, because he was really into like Native American and African American music. He was born in the Czech Republic, or Czechia now as it's called, but then he moved to Iowa. My wife hates Iowa. She thinks that his music sounds depressing because he was in Iowa. But yeah, he did move to Iowa, which is where my seminary is. And yeah, he has a lot of American themes in his music. Next, we have Henry Purcell. He was Anglican. He's pretty good. Okay, who's next? Next, we have Rachmaninoff and Glinka. Those are the only, like, devout Eastern Orthodox composers I could find. Late Romantic. The Romantic era, I think, is where the Russians dominate. But sadly, a lot of the great Russian composers like Tchaikovsky and Rimsky-Korsakov or Shostakovich were either nominally Orthodox or explicitly atheist, like Shostakovich. And then we have two more nominally Catholic composers. There's Chopin, there's Lully. Lully was also, Skittles like Tchaikovsky. And then we have, what's his name? Ralph Vaughan Williams. He was very culturally Anglican. He was obsessed with the culture of the Church of England, but he was not very religious himself. All right. Next, in C tier, because there's so many C tier composers, I can't possibly include all of them. So I'm just gonna have one C tier composer for every for Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox. So our Protestant C tier composer is James Oswald. He's a Scottish Presbyterian composer, and he is the only Scottish Presbyterian composer I was able to find at all. And his music's nice, but it's basically just like variations on Scottish folk songs. It's nothing earth shattering. And then for Catholics, we have Salieri. Now, the movie Amadeus totally slanders Salieri. In real life, Salieri loved Mozart and really helped him with his career. But if it weren't for the movie, nobody would know who Salieri is. And Salieri's music, you can tell it's very basic. It's like the meme about him being like a very mediocre composer in the movie exists for a reason. But just because it's like mediocre doesn't mean it's bad. Like, I enjoy listening to Salieri sometimes. In fact, I think listening to average so-so classical composers helps you appreciate the greats more, because our ears are spoiled, because the only classical music we listen to is like the best of the best of the best of the best, because the stuff that stands the test of time. But back in the day, every church had its own composer. So the classical music people were getting in the classical era largely was crap. Crap compared to what we have now. So Salieri isn't even crap. He was considered like the greatest composer in Europe for a time. Often what's famous during its own time is not what's famous later. But I think learning to appreciate not horrible, but just average classical music helps you really see why Mozart was such a genius. Like, the reason Mozart's a genius is he is able to take very, very simple things like scales and arpeggios and turn them into something very beautiful and complex. And then we have Stravinsky for Eastern Orthodox. It seems like he was pretty devout for his time period, but, you know, I played Rite of Spring. I played Firebird. It's all right. Anyone can write that. I'm sorry. Like, I don't like 20th century music. It's like, so I had this composition teacher, and I would try to write in like a Baroque style, and he'd be like, it's okay, but you should make it more modern. And then one time, I just got mad at him, so I wrote random notes for like 3 pages, and he heard it, and he was like, "This is the best thing you've ever written." So, you know, you can't, if you can't tell the difference between a 20th century piece and a cat walking across the piano, it's because it's bad. Okay, you're not being creative. You're just trying to tear things down. All right, so for D and F tier, I'm only gonna have one of them each, because, you know, there's so many D and F tier composers you could think of. I can't really decide which to use. And neither of them were devout. So for D tier, we're going to have Bartók, who grew up devout Catholic but became a Unitarian. And for F tier, we have Schoenberg, who is like the patron saint of modern garbage atonal 20th century music. Schoenberg was born Jewish and converted briefly to Lutheranism, but then reverted to Judaism. So, guys, that's my composers tier list. I know you guys probably disagree with some of this because, you know, everyone's taste in music is different, but as long as we can agree Bach is the best, we're cool.